Before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more bedtime stories. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. And if there's a story you'd like to hear next, I'd love to know that, too. There are winters that grip like iron claws. Winters so harsh that even the air cracks under the weight of the cold. But the winter of 1874 was something else entirely. It didn't just chill the body. It locked grief in place, turning it into something you could touch, something that wouldn't melt away. That year, in a forgotten mining town nestled in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains in Colorado, an event unfolded that would puzzle doctors and preachers alike for years to come. It all started in a rickety cabin on the outskirts of town, where the wind howled through cracked boards and the fireplace flickered weakly, barely pushing back the frost. Inside that home lay Elizabeth Thorne, a 59-year-old widow who had lived alone for too long, shadowed by the ghost of her husband, a prospector swallowed by a cave-in deep in the hills decades earlier. They never found his remains. Folks in town said that after that day, Elizabeth's spirit never warmed again. She kept to herself, rarely speaking. Her sons mentioned finding her gazing out at the snowdrifts, murmuring his name to the empty fields. Then January hit, a month so vicious that breaths turned to ice crystals on people's beards. Influenza ravaged Elizabeth fiercely. For days, she fought for air, hacking up blood onto cloths that stiffened in the chill by morning. Her sons tended to her as best they could, heating kettles, wrapping her in quilts warmed by the fire, reciting verses from the Bible into the night. But as the first light broke, her breathing stuttered, rasped in her throat, and ceased. Her sons grieved deeply. Yet before their sorrow could fully take hold, they saw the impossible. Under her shut eyelids, small translucent fragments started to appear. At first, they figured it was just condensation, simple tears hardened by the freeze. But these weren't mere drops. They were flawless needles of ice pushing out from beneath the lashes, as if her very gaze had solidified from the inside out. The boys yelled for aid, calling for Dr. Harlan, the town's sole medic. He rushed in, out of breath, lantern swinging, his boots crunching on the icy path. When he prodded the shards with his wool-mittened hand, he jerked back. They were unyielding, colder than any winter stream, like they'd been pulled from an ancient glacier. By nightfall, when Elizabeth's body was carried to the county morgue, rumors were already swirling. The locals dubbed her the Widow of Icy Sorrow. The morgue was a grim building of brick walls and steel slabs, dimly illuminated by kerosene lamps that sputtered in the drafts. The scent of rot lingered, barely covered by lye soap. Workers in heavy wool coats moved quietly, their exhalations fogging as they shifted the deceased from pine carts. When they peeled back Elizabeth's blanket, her expression was peaceful, mouth colorless, brows rimed with frost. And there they were once more, the subtle contours of crystalline sorrow gleaming in the lamplight. The handlers whispered old folk sayings. The room's chill was expected, they packed sawdust and snow around corpses every season. But these shards were unnatural. Even transported from her somewhat warmer cabin, they hadn't thawed. And within 60 minutes of placing her on the table, fresh ones emerged. It was as if a hidden wellspring of morning kept flowing, hardening at the brink of eternity. That evening, the handlers reported subtle snapping noises, like frost spreading over a still pond. Nobody ventured near after sunset. Come morning, Dr. Harlan returned with 2 associates from a neighboring valley, both educated skeptics who scoffed at tall tales. They gathered around the slab with journals and lenses. Their lights threw stark beams onto the remains. For hours, they examined the shards. One suggested it was hardened minerals from the tear glands. Another countered that no mineral could shape such elegant forms. "These aren't minerals," he murmured. "They're beyond that." Yet none could account for the new formations or why they defied melting, even near the flame. When one doctor chipped a piece into a jar, it dissolved at once. But seconds later, fine frost veins crept along the container, refreezing right there. The group fell quiet. Dr. Harlan finally breathed. "It's like grief has taken shape." By the third evening, Elizabeth's body was readied for interment. The handlers toiled wordlessly, the distant wail of wind echoing down the hall. One moved to adjust her position and inhaled sharply. Before him, shards formed anew, easing outward gently, soundlessly, as if the form rebelled against peace. One shattered under his finger, scattering like broken crystal across the floor. That broke them. The men declined to linger. They bundled her hastily, breathed quiet invocations, and doused their lights one after another. The following dawn, under a sky-like dull lead, Elizabeth Thorne was committed to the frozen soil in the town cemetery. The earth was so solid the diggers had to douse it with steaming pots to loosen it. Ice clung to their whiskers as they labored, vapor blending with their pants. Her sons stood in dark overcoats, their fingers quivering. They shed no tears, maybe fearing theirs would harden too. As the pine box lowered, a blast of wind ripped through the burial ground. One son later vowed he heard a soft fracturing noise from below, like ice buckling on a creek. That night, frost etched the chapel panes in odd designs, slender forking paths that mimicked rivulets of sorrow. Within days, the whole town knew of the icy widow. Some saw it as divine, her longing for her vanished husband solidified in passing, timeless and untainted. Others muttered of dark forces, that his specter had returned in chill to seize her essence. The tale spread to adjacent settlements. Strangers visited the cemetery, pressing palms to her plot to sense if the dirt was colder than nearby. And many affirmed it was. Even come thaw, the ground over her never fully softened. Young ones claimed that pressing an ear to the turf revealed faint chiming below, the echo of sorrow hardening and splintering endlessly. Years on, scholars and experts tried to rationalize it. Some called it chemical, vapors, solidification, or a quirk of weather. Others deemed it folklore amplified by retellings. But none could dismiss the testimonies, the shards that appeared afresh after the form was prepared and preserved, or how frost motifs echoed gazes and sorrow on her box lid. To this day, no lab report refutes the occurrence. Only the medic's log endures, inscribed in tidy script from the era. Subject: Elizabeth Thorne, 59. Shards beneath eyes, enduring, origin unclear. Over a century hence, pilgrims to the aged burial site still recount her. They say the sod atop her plot stays moist and frigid, even under midday rays. Some allege glimpses of sparkles, as if beneath the loam something snags the dawn mist and transforms it to rime. They term it the widow's chill. But among residents, the legend bears another title: the icy sorrow. For mourning that profound doesn't fade. It lingers, solidified and hushed beneath the dirt where lament becomes crystal and spurns dissolution. And each winter when the freeze returns and the soil stiffens once more, folks say you can sense her presence. The widow who wept frost, her sorrow iced eternally between realms. There are few sights that can turn a medic's stomach after years on the job. The odor of putrefaction, the gleam of wounds, the rigidity of demise. These grow ordinary with time. But now and then, a case rolls into the morgue that upends all you've grasped about existence and what you believed about the end. In the spring of 1875, in a misty valley town in Pennsylvania, one such form arrived. The man's name was Jonathan Hale, and his passing, as the papers would hush later, wasn't the odd bit. It was what lingered alive in him. The body came by cart amid the season's first downpour. Two laborers dragged the corpse into the old county morgue, drenched through. Discovered him near the creek bed, one grunted, mopping his brow. Likely drowned. At a glance, the medic concurred. Hale's flesh was bloated and pallid, mouth azure, gaze partially ajar. But an unease clung to the form. A subtle darkness under the nails, as if he'd scratched at shadows before the end. They laid him on the platform, draped him in cloth, and departed for the evening. But at daybreak, when the staff returned, they halted. The body remained undisturbed, but the vermin were lifeless. Back then, the morgue's lower level teemed with mice, scores of them. No amount of bait or snares kept them at bay. They scavenged the remnants of mortality, bits of skin, drippings from the fluids. But that morn, they discovered 7, rigid, contorted, jaws frothing, scattered close to Hale's platform. The rest lurked in corners, chittering, but never approaching. One staffer, a fellow named Grady, picked up a dead mouse with his covered hand and grumbled, "Never known 'em to turn down a meal." The medic chuckled uneasily. "Mice know more than we do," he replied. But as he drew back the fabric from Jonathan Hale's visage, his mirth evaporated. No hint of breakdown, not one insect, and graver still, the eyes stared upward, locked on the rafters. The irises had shifted to a hue like damp coal. The form appeared vigilant. By day 2, Hale's body ought to have altered. The morgue was humid and tepid. Forms spoiled swiftly in such air. But not this. His hide held firm. His vessels, dimly traced under the surface, grew inkier by the minute, as though a current persisted inside. When the medic sliced the initial cut, the aroma was off. Not spoilage. It was coppery. Piercing, metallic, akin to new spilled life. He cursed softly. The fluid that oozed wasn't thick and murky like a gone man's. It was vivid. Too vivid. Grady blanched. "That can't be, Doc. He's been gone 48 hours. The medic cleaned his blade and muttered. "Then tell me this." From the edge of the platform, a mouse emerged. Tiny, ashen, quivering. It inched nearer to the remains, sampled the scent, and then in a savage spasm, toppled, expired before contacting the flesh. The chamber hushed. Jonathan Hale had toiled as a steelworker in the Pine Ridge Mill. He was seen as a reserve sort, a widower who labored diligently and uttered little. But tales circulated, murmurs that he'd struck a pact after his spouse's departure, that he'd visited a shadowed mill chapel where workers dropped tokens for fortune before shifts. Per his mates, Hale started donning a pendant, a crude etched amulet of ivory. And from then, harm evaded him. When a furnace blast felled 8, he emerged unscathed. Another shift, he was trapped for hours, yet they freed him gasping air. He quipped, "The departed shun me," one worker remembered. Claimed they'd attempted already. By the 4th dusk, the morgue staff balked at nearing Hale's form. The atmosphere around the platform had chilled, dense, like the breath of an unearthed pit. The gas lamps wavered when anyone drew close. And the mice kept distant. At last, the medic resolved to conclude the ordeal. He commanded the form boxed and interred at once. But as they hoisted Hale from the platform, a noise issued from his gullet. Not a groan, not an inhalation. Something like a faint sibilance of vapor leaking a closed vault. Grady fumbled his grip on the box. "Lord save us," he hissed. "He's drawing breath." The medic shook his head. "It's vapors, a bodily quirk," he maintained. But on retry, the sound repeated, drawn out, gentler, and now the gaze twitched. For an instant, the pupils widened. The staff bolted the space. They entombed him that very eve in Trinity Hill graveyard. No clergy, no rite, merely the clang of spades on sodden ground. The medic inscribed the log with unsteady fingers. But by morn, the plot was tampered. The soil churned, gouges evident in the mire, not from surface, but below. The plot tender swore he detected stirring under the turf pre-dawn. A scraping, a pounding. But upon return at sunrise, all stilled. Only the mice vanished. A week hence, the town's baker uncovered a dead mouse on his stoop. Swollen, maw-darkened. Then more, then hordes. Along the lanes by the creek, the mice perished, carcasses strewn like debris. Yet none bore marks. It was as if vitality had fled them. Then one evening, a tipsy mill hand staggered into the saloon, face like chalk. He vowed he'd spied Jonathan Hale in the graveyard, caked in mud to his shins, neck cocked, gaze like vapor. The next morn, that same hand was discovered expired in his cot, hide gray, vessels ebony as pitch. Decades rolled, but no soul in town ever unearthed his plot again. The graveyard was forsaken, the area barred, and the morgue file locked. But aged plot tenders spin a yarn still shared by lantern glow that each spring when the ground yields and the creek rises, mice bolt from the graveyard. None fathom why. And those venturing near post-twilight sometimes catch rasping from under the sod like claws on timber. The myth holds Jonathan Hale wasn't damned. He was shielded. That something in that dim chapel under the mills branded him its kin. And whatever that entity, it barred his decay. Even demise, it appears, rejected him. For in that town, folks say there are two sorts of plots. Those that slumber serene and those that nourish not. And Jonathan Hale's plot, it nourishes not. Not even the mice. They say shadows only trail the quick. But in 1997, I witnessed one bow beside the departed and murmur please. I'd served as a mortician for almost 15 years then, long enough to think I'd encountered every oddity a human frame could offer. I was mistaken. The summons arrived one brisk February dawn. The state required a body disinterred for a court probe. The man's name was Nathaniel Brooks, laid to rest 8 years back in the serene town of Springfield, Missouri. His surviving kin alleged foul play, not mishap, as the report stated. So they demanded him exhumed, rechecked for facts. It was standard procedure, at least in theory. But the instant I viewed the grave, a sensation I'd not felt in ages crept in. Doubt. The breeze felt thicker there. The turf dimmer than around, as if the land had soaked in what it ought not. The excavation crew showed at first light, breaths pluming, tools piercing the soil. The thud of iron on rock resounded in the crisp air. It demanded nearly 3 hours to hit the casket. When we forced the top, the stench assaulted first. That cloying embalmed decay that sticks to your garb for weeks. But what drove us back wasn't the odor. It was the silhouette. Within the casket, Nathaniel Brooks's remains rested as anticipated, partly intact from the loam and chill. But beneath the strobe of the spotlights, I spotted the unthinkable. A silhouette in the casket, one unaccounted for. It wasn't thrown by us. We verified our beams, our stances, but it persisted. A gloomier outline huddled next to the corpse, stooped as if beseeching. Initially, I blamed fatigue. The brain conjures oddities amid mortality. But the crew perceived it likewise. Good heavens, one laborer breathed. And as he uttered it, the silhouette stirred. Merely a shimmer, a can of the crown like it had pivoted toward us. The spotlight faltered, then extinguished. For a heartbeat, obscurity engulfed us. And in that void, I detected a thing. A subtle sift. The whisper of parched dirt moving. When the beam reignited, the silhouette had vanished. But the casket differed. Nathaniel's arms, once laid across his torso, were now clasped, digits entwined like in supplication. We conveyed the remains to the preparation chamber that dusk. Routine steadied me, coverings donned, instruments arrayed, logs begun, yet my grasp trembled. The unearthed deceased always unsettle. Their forms that should have concluded their dissolution, yet linger. But this was distinct. His sockets were hollowed, but the flesh encircling them bore inky blots as if a substance had oozed from inside. His nails were ebony, but not from grime. The tint seeped under the beds, nearly like contusions, balanced, intentional. As I proceeded to cleanse the remains, I noted it anew. Under the stand, my silhouette curved with me, as expected. But another existed, a dim stooping form on the linoleum beside the stand. It wasn't mine. It was slighter, frilier, its back curved, crown lowered, palms joined, as prior, as in the pit. That evening, I lingered to complete the forms. All others had departed. The morgue was still, save the drone of the chillers. Then I caught it, a muted noise. Not from the passage, not from the ducts. It emanated from the stand. A gentle susurrus, scarcely heard. It wasn't talk, not initially, more like a gust through a vacant windpipe. Then gradually, it shaped phrases. Let him be. The tone was frail, urgent, like it hailed from profound depths. Beneath the sod, I let fall my quill. It rattled on the tile, resounding overloud in the vacant space. When I glanced back at the remains, the silhouette stooped again. But now, its palms weren't in plea. They extended toward the corpse's countenance. The following day, the autopsy squad arrived to assess the relics. I omitted what I'd beheld. They'd mock or, worse, deem me unhinged. They operated swiftly, documenting all. Demise still noted as suffocation from earth pressure. Nothing peculiar, nothing otherworldly. But as they stowed gear, one, a fresh aide, scowled and queried, "Anyone see his eyes are ajar now?" All stilled. I edged nearer. He was correct. The lids had risen midway, exposing the vitreous, shadowed orbs, and in that sheen, I vow I glimpsed a thing not us. A murky form lingering behind me, arched low, crown askew. When I whirled, not. The remains were slated for reburial. But that night, slumber evaded me. Each time I shut my lids, I envisioned the stooping entity in my chamber's nook, mute, enduring, as if awaiting the lamp's snuff. At 12:47 after midnight, a noise from my corridor chilled me, a languid scrape. I unlatched my portal and there it loomed, a somber mass of planks inching to the entry. I petrified. My inhalation caught. Then it halted and leisurely it ascended, not aloft, but into a man's contour kneeling. Identical stance, identical inclined crown. I murmured, "What seek you?" It offered no reply. It merely lifted one limb, skeletal, shuddering, and gestured to the pane. Beyond, in the lamp's halo, I spied two shapes by the wagon across the lane, the reburial crew. They were settling the casket into the loam, and as the casket met the dirt, the silhouette near me dissipated, simply evaporated, absent. Come morn, I visited the burial site. The fresh mound was raw, soil clammy, and somber. But on the heap of earth there were dual imprints. One the stamp of a casket's burden. The other faint, shallow, undeniable, was the trace of knees. It seemed as if a presence had knelt there through the dark. Beseeching, anticipating, sentinel. Some eves when I sealed the preparation chamber and quenched the beams, I still scanned for my silhouette to ensure it's solitary in pursuit. For what I gleaned that winter in Missouri is this. The departed may repose, but at times another lingers to enforce it. And if you ever unearth the bygone, confirm it's primed for unrest. For when I pried that casket, I didn't merely rouse the departed. I roused the entity that beseeches for them. Some artifacts don't merely echo the gone, they retain them. In the winter of 1901, the final Whitaker kin perished within their fading manor on the fringes of Vermont. The house was a crumbling maze of pine halls and chill drawing rooms brimming with artifacts, canvases that appeared to exhale age, timepieces silent for years, and looking glasses, scores of them. When I reached there, I wasn't for the breathing. I was to retrieve the form. My name is Elias Ford, and I was the region's mortician, a man who earned from the hush of the hereafter. I'd visited the Whitaker Manor once prior, when the patriarch departed. He'd insisted the looking glasses be shrouded during his vigil. Never permit the gone to glimpse themselves, he'd rasped on his final bed. Back then, I dismissed it as folklore. Now I comprehend otherwise. Upon entering the salon, Abigail Whitaker reclined in her silk seat as if she'd dozed amid discourse. The blaze had extinguished hours earlier. Rime scaled the sashes. Adjacent was a looking glass, a lavish rounded piece edged in dulled brass, so lofty it almost grazed the beams. The steward informed me it had been her ancestors, shipped from overseas, fashioned by a craftsman who lost his wits ere completion. She conversed with it nightly, the steward added. Vowed it replied. I assented, feigning indifference. But as I stooped over the form, a detail snared my gaze. The looking glass's face wasn't static. It undulated subtly, as if a presence under the pane respired. I convinced myself it was the blaze's glow. But pivoting, the hearth was barren. Yet there it persisted, a motion within the looking glass, tender and purposeful. It wasn't my echo. It wasn't hers. It was aft us both, hazy, obscured, like a shape in mist. I summoned the steward, but he'd left to gather coverings, so it was solely me, the corpse, and the looking glass. When I gazed anew, the shape was nearer, its borders sharp now, back bowed, countenance veiled. It positioned straight behind Abigail's seat, where I'd stood instants ago. I spun promptly, pulse racing. Nothing. Merely the vacant salon. The talk of a timepiece that shouldn't talk. Facing the looking glass once more, the shape had departed. But now another thing. A subtle palm mark on the pane's interior. By dusk, I had the form in my wagon. But as I exited the manor, the steward hailed from the threshold, "You neglected to veil the looking glass." I halted. Custom dictated looking glasses be cloaked posthumised to bar the essence from ensnarement. I'd performed it countless times. But that eve, for motives I yet can't fathom, I didn't return. That was my initial error. The Whitaker lady was transported to the Region Morgue that dusk. The space was tranquil, lit by a lone globe that hummed feebly. I commenced, purifying, attiring, suturing, the customary ceremonies of conservation. But every several moments I sensed it. A mild quiver on the steel surface as if a tap issued from below. When I inspected, not there. The noise ceased upon my downward glance and resumed on aversion. By 2 after midnight, I neared completion. That's when I perceived it. A murmur, delicate, airless, directly aft my lobe. It was feminine. So soft, acquainted. It uttered one term. Gaze. I rotated gradually toward the preparation chamber looking glass, the one for verifying garb and display. There, mirrored flawlessly, was Abigail's form. And positioned aft her with palms on her blades, was another Abigail, ethereal, one, her lips near her own lobe, murmuring to herself. Then she pivoted toward me and grinned. The beam overhead jittered fiercely. The echo stammered like reel skipping. Then snap. A fine split traversed the looking glass from apex to base. I leaped aft, heart thundering. The noise of fracturing pane resounded, though the looking glass held. In the echo, both Abigails had vanished. But the palm mark lingered. That identical palm mark I had noted in her salon. Only now it was on my face of the pane. Come morn, the medic arrived to endorse the documents. He paused mid-review and uttered softly, "Noted her gaze?" I inclined. Abigail's gaze, which I'd sealed hours prior, was ajar again. Worse, the orbs had silvery fissures in them, like slender metallic rents through obsidian, precisely like the one on the looking glass. I secured her casket within 60 minutes. The rite was intimate, present only the steward. I descended her into the loam myself, intoning the phrases from recall. The steward set a cluster of pale roses, then retreated and murmured, "She's yet there." I assumed he meant the beyond, but he gestured aft me. Pivoting, I beheld the wagon sash, and in its echo, just for a beat, Abigail by the pit. Her visage serene, palms linked, and beside her, another presence observing me. It was inhuman, its appendages overlong, its echo warping where pain shouldn't warp. 2 weeks hence, I awoke to a noise that iced my veins. It was the subtle rap of nails on pane emanating from my salon. Entering, every looking glass in my abode and every glazed plane, even the sash, was misted from within. And on one, inscribed reversed, was a lone term. Gaze. I shrouded them all that eve. But even veiled, I could detect it. Muted murmurs behind the linens like a voice speaking just beyond the pane. I vacated that dwelling a month on. But at times when I pass a curio store, I catch my echo in a lofty looking glass. And for a mere instant, I see her there adjacent, murmuring, "I warned you not to leave it bare." The Whitaker Manor was razed in 1903. Laborers recounted queer mishaps, splintered sashes, implements snapping, and one claiming he saw his echo wink unbidden. The looking glass proper was never recovered, but area hoarders say a brass-edged rounded looking glass occasionally surfaces at manor auctions across the Northeast, ever pristine, regardless of years. Those acquiring it report identical. At start, a mild warp, a wave in the echo, then murmurs in the gloom, and ultimately the noise of digits rapping on the pane's interior. For some looking glasses don't merely display what's present. They cling to what shouldn't endure. And once you've peered into them, they never cease peering back. Some claim malevolence doesn't perish. It merely shifts shape and bides to be unearthed anew. In 1947, in a quaint hamlet on the rim of Massachusetts, a man named Harlan Voss dwelled solitary in a weathered atelier. He was a puppet craftsman once renowned for his handmade ceramic countenances, their gazes so vivid they disquieted buyers. After his partner's demise, his creations altered. The puppets paled, nearly see-through with crystal orbs that appeared sentient. Local youths hissed that he employed actual locks and ivories in his puppets. Grown-ups brushed it off as prattle. But when Voss ceased emerging altogether, chatter revived, particularly after the post-carrier observed oddity, puppets materializing in casements at dusk, their crowns pivoting as he went by. Months on, post-Voss's abrupt vanishing, authorities breached the atelier. What they uncovered was more alarming than any yarn. Hundreds of puppets arrayed the ledges, all oriented to the chamber's core, as if awaiting address. On the bench rested an incomplete puppet, diminutive, ashen, and uncannily lifelike. But the element that seized their notice most was the ledger. Its opening leaves detailed the craft. Shaping mud, baking ceramic, daubing fine features. But as the notations progressed, the script morphed from tidy loops to frantic gouges. Here's what they perused. February 18th. She confided she hears them. The ones aft the panels. She claims they murmur titles. March 2nd. The crystal orbs won't hush. They shift unseen. March 29th. She craves a fresh form. Says this one's fracturing. I hear her sobbing when the blaze dims. April 5th. She says her title isn't Beatrice. Not any longer. On the ledger's rear was something peculiar. A sketch of a looking glass. A lofty brass-edged one with a shaded presence aft it. Beneath, a row and quaking hand. The looking glass revealed how to render her tangible. The sleuths didn't grasp it then, but years later, spectral scholars tied Voss's atelier to a particular looking glass salvaged from the Whitaker Manor. The identical looking glass from the Murmuring Pane, 1901. Per deed logs, it had been acquired at a manor vendu by a secluded gatherer in 1938. That gatherer was Harlan Voss. The looking glass hadn't merely endured. It had secured its subsequent bearer. The incomplete puppet from Voss's atelier was seized as proof and stowed in the depths of the county constabulary. Constables jested over it. One even relocated it chamber to spook the night sentries until the initial perished. His form was uncovered in the proof vault, slumped on the ledge. His gaze wide, pupils veiled with a subtle opalescent sheen like ceramic varnish. Beside him, the puppet lay shattered, and from the fragments of its crown, something diminutive and inky had poured, like cinders or dust. the examiner deemed it cardiac failure. But the second constable who entered the vault 2 dusks on said he caught murmuring, not haphazard breaths, but his own title echoed ceaselessly. He resigned the morrow. Years elapsed. The puppet was ultimately overlooked, encased in a timber bin, then misplaced amid a vault deluge in the 1970s. When the constabulary relocated, that bin was fondue with scores more. None tracked who procured it, but in 1981, a household in New Hampshire recounted discovering an aged ceramic puppet in a sealed container bought from a constabulary excess fondue. They positioned it in their offspring's chamber. Within weeks, the child commenced addressing it, dubbing it by a title untaught. B, she uttered. B says she abhors looking glasses. When the household cleric arrived to sanctify the abode, he declined to contact the puppet. He claimed he could detect a feminine tone resounding faintly within the ceramic, a tone summoning Harlan. The puppet was ultimately seized by a duo of spectral sleuths, Jack and Evelyn Hayes, and encased in a pane enclosure marked plainly "Caution, absolutely do not unseal." In 1992, a taped dialogue emerged amid hoarders purportedly of Evelyn Hayes herself. In it, she depicted a migration instance where a hexed artifact had borne vigor across eras. Her terms, it commenced with a looking glass. The looking glass turned conduit and the conduit turned a youth's plaything. Once the phantom master's binding, it never releases. They claim Beatrice was merely a puppet. She was never merely a puppet. In 2017, post-a-gallery blackout, guard footage seized something unnerving. The enclosure holding Beatrice glimmered in the murk and for 3 seconds her crown pivoted. Sleuths dismissed it as light play. But if you decelerate the reel, you'll note another. A subtle echo on the pane enclosure. It wasn't the guard. It was a lady in a lengthy ebony gown positioned just aft the puppet. One palm against the pane. Her visage wan, gaze broad, lips shifting wordlessly. And if you boost the sound, you can detect it. A murmur under the crackle. Harlan, they claim the looking glass and the puppet were dual facets of the identical hex. A phantom questing for shape, for substance, for perpetuity. The looking glass clutches the echo. The puppet clutches the form. And so long as one peers, so long as one trusts, the yarn will never conclude. So, the next occasion you view Beatrice's pane enclosure in a clip or gallery, scrutinize your own echo after her. If it stirs even slightly, don't wink because she's not confined within. You are. But whispers persist in the shadows of that old gallery, hinting that Beatrice's enclosure isn't the end. Perhaps another artifact waits, disguised in plain sight, ready to bind the next unwitting soul.